On the morning of 9/11, I stood in a classroom in New York City. In my memoir, Wildflowers and Present Tenses, I have a story that I wrote about that experience. In this podcast, I'll be sharing that story with you. This is Standing Memory. Standing Memory. On the morning of 9/11, 2001, I stood in a classroom very much like the one I stand in right now. It was election day in New York City, and most of my students were annoyed that the gym had been taken over by voting machines, depriving them of their gym classes and basketball practice. But the heat of summer was gone, and the day was perfect. The sky was the kind of blue that promised the freedom of schoolyards, basketball hoops, and picnic tables. At 9:35, my students eyed the clock as they always did at this time, awaiting the bell that would propel them out of class and into the noisy, chaotic, and freewheeling hallways of IS 52. But the bell did not ring. We waited and fidgeted. Finally, the principal came on the loudspeaker. "Attention, please," he said, haltingly. "The bells will be held until further notice. Teachers, please keep students in your second period classes." My students groaned. I groaned too, under my breath. I poked my head out of my classroom to see if I could get any information from the neighboring teachers, or passers-by, and noticed most of the other teachers on my floor were doing the same. None of us knew a thing. We had nothing but shrugs to offer each other. Our whispers were interrupted by footsteps approaching. A group of 20 poll workers, escorted by school security, walked stiffly but quickly from the gym to the exit doors. "Elections are canceled?" we whispered. The workers did not respond to our inquiries, but walked stone-faced without making eye contact. What do they know? I wondered. Around the time the bell for fourth hour should have rung, a lone figure came through the hall, stopping at each door briefly and then moving to the next. Mrs. Schwartz, the speech therapist, approached me. There has been an attack on the World Trade Center," she said. She looked exhausted and frightened. The principal had assigned her the grim task of messenger. No loudspeaker announcements could be made for such things. "2 planes have flown into both towers. Both towers have come down," she said. "Are we at war?" I asked. "We don't know," she said. "The principal wants the teachers to find a way to tell the students without creating panic, and we will not be dismissing anyone until a family member comes to get them. They need to stay with you." I stood like a stone in the doorway of my classroom, my back to my students. They talked and joked and laughed behind me, unaware of having been transported into a new and foreboding reality, even as they sat in room 103. Our world had changed, just like that. How could I articulate the incomprehensible? What words could I possibly use to give them the news without causing panic? How could I convey calm when my own hands trembled, when my own mind swirled? How could I answer a single question when I had not a single answer? Are we at war? The question made me dizzy, so I put it aside, took a breath, and turned to my students. My face must have spoken for me. I did not need to ask for their attention. "Does anyone have a family member or loved one who works at the World Trade Center?" I asked. Hector, sitting in the back of the class, raised his hands quickly. His face beamed with pride. "My father!" My heart sank. I searched for words and forgot about the no prayer in school policy. Prayer seemed to be the only appropriate response. "Well, let's say a little prayer for all those who work at the World Trade Center and for Hector's father," I said quietly. "Why, Miss Lucia? What happened?" a student in the front row asked me. He sat close enough to see my effort to steady my voice and hands. I told them what I had been told and told Hector that his father had most likely gotten out safely. Over the next few hours, we waited for family members to arrive. Parents, aunts, uncles, older siblings, whoever could get to the school by foot, as that was now the only way to move about the city. There were no subways, buses, or taxis. Broadway Avenue, which stretches from one end of Manhattan to the other, had become a sea of people slowly moving north. Women walked barefoot or in their stockings, carrying their shoes. Shopkeepers along Broadway brought people water and fruit. Shoe store owners gave away sneakers. The sea of humanity moved silently, like a vigil, hundreds of thousands strong. Later, when I watched it on the news, I would pray Hector's father was among them. The next few weeks were filled with candlelight vigils, posters of missing family members pasted on walls, flags on fire escapes, firemen digging for their fallen brothers, and countless stories of heroism. We would discover that Hector's father was lost in Tower 1. We would learn a new vocabulary word, terrorism. All of this was punctuated by the low roar of F-16s and blanketed by the constant smell of smoke from the smoldering towers. The scent of the burning towers was everywhere, as inescapable as an Egyptian plague. Memory is a funny thing. We remember specific things from 9/11, like the color of the sky that day, or that sea of people walking silently up Broadway. Maybe we remember the sound of the F-16s flying low over the George Washington Bridge, or a hero's story that resurfaces every anniversary. Our oldest memories are associated with smell. We remember a smell longer than a visual memory or a memory associated with sound. Somewhere in my cellular memory, the distinct smell of the smoldering twin towers is locked away. It will be there for a long time, maybe lifetimes. One day, I may look at a sky that holds the same promise as that perfect blue sky of 9/11 and feel my heart drop with the memory. But I don't imagine my memory will ever be stirred by a scent as distinct as the smoldering twin towers. Not because terrorism no longer exists or bombs or war, but because the towers no longer do. And just as I stood in a class those years ago, struggling for words to describe a world without the towers, I now stand in another classroom, searching for words to describe the world in which they once stood. This is Story Bridge with Patty Lucia. Thanks for listening.